welcome to Movies, Films, and Flicks. I am Mark Hoffmeyer, and joining me is a man who built a custom-built torture computer chair to sit on for this episode. It's Jake Lewitt.
I wonder what happens when I get off. Like, firstly, I can't get out at the moment. I'm locked in somehow. But something's going to be like left behind. I'm glued to this thing, or is a padlock in it somewhere, or everything? I don't know. I'm just going to live here. I live in this chair now.
Well, the good news is, if you survive afterwards, you're going to be a better person.
Less of a person, but a better person.
John Kramer, bless him. What an idiot. But what a beautiful
cool
idiot.
Guy.
What? So, Jay, I brought you in part of this month, and I'm going to keep doing it, but I'm just having MFF All-Stars come in to explain horror franchise and upcoming franchises to me. And I wanted to personally take Saw. And the good news is you've seen most of them except for the back three. So yes. I'll be able to explain them all, and then hopefully you'll be able to understand the back three as well. So this is going to be a lot of fun. And like, Saw has been on my mind for a long time. Like, I wrote an episode for Film Theory about how to survive Saw. So I watched every single thing. I got every kill. I did every every aspect of Saw that you could do. I noted, and I wrote a script for that. And I also just wrote an article for Rotten Tomatoes where I figured out the 10 greatest horror franchises according to like user scores, tomato meter scores, and box office. And Saw ranks number 7. So Saw actually beat out Nose and Insidious and Predator, which is kind of nuts. It's just audiences love it, and it makes money. And it's just a scrappy little thing. And so
it's the franchise that I've read the Wikipedia pages of the most. But still, I've seen the first 7. I've read the pages on the back 3. I've gone back and reread like 4 through 7. I like the traps. I can't remember the plot. They get all mismatched together, and I'm looking forward to you explaining it to me.
It is a lot. And before we get going, I just I refreshed a 2017 article I wrote for Rotten Tomatoes, and I figured out that Saw films in which something is sawed off completely, those are the 2 best movies, Saw and Saw 10. I'm not going to say what happens in Saw 10, but using a saw, an actual hand saw, not like a butcher's knife, and sawing something completely off, the only 2 movies feature that, and they're the 2 highest rated ones. Yeah, so I just want to let everyone know that. If you want to go check Rotten Tomatoes for my article, I really wrote some weird stuff.
What does the lady use in 6 to cut off her arm? Is that a saw?
She uses a butcher knife.
A knife, okay.
Yeah, she like hacks it off. And in Jigsaw, a leg is squeezed off, but that's not a saw.
Yes. I've seen like a bunch of clips from Jigsaw on YouTube. They just show up on my timeline all the time. I watch deaths on YouTube a lot. Like movie deaths is just how I chill out sometimes.
Dead meat, baby.
Yeah.
So but I also figure out Saw films in which a saw is used on Jigsaw. Saw films in which a saw kills somebody, Saw films featuring a hacksaw from the first film, Saw films with sawing attempts that don't result in death. So I really went at the Saw franchise. And all right, so we're gonna do it, Jay. You ready? Okay.
Yes.
First I'm gonna drop the timeline on you. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna explain them all in order, but I want to get some housekeeping out of the way to prevent me from going really down a rabbit hole. So this is how the movies play in order. So the half of Jigsaw starts the film because Jigsaw is a prequel and a sequel. So the first parts of Jigsaw take place before the first Saw. So you have half of Jigsaw, then you have Saw 2004, the OG, then you have Saw 10 that plays in between Saw and Saw 2. So you have Saw 10, then you have Saw 2, and then get this, Saw 3 and 4 are at the same time.
Yes.
Then you have Saw 5, which is shortly after, then Saw 6, then you get Saw 3D, which takes place, I don't know, like a couple months because Hoffman's scars are all healed. Then you have the other half of Jigsaw, and then you have Spiral. So that's the timeline right there. And then Saw, the franchise, it all revolves around this guy named John Kramer, a civil engineer. He's married to Jill. They were going to have a child, but something horrible happened. They had to lose the child. This guy, John Kramer, learns that he has an inoperable brain tumor. And due to like a calamity of like insane issues, he can't get his x-rays get mixed up. All this gets mixed, like everything gets mixed up. The healthcare, everyone's bad. And eventually he can't work on it until it's inoperable, and he's going to die soon. So he attempts suicide, but he survives. And he's like, hey, I feel better. I feel better about myself. And he decides to spend the rest of his life on testing other people. So he's like, I'm going to take people who aren't living their lives. I'm going to make them hack off their arms and be like, aren't you happy? So it's, he separates from Jill and he goes off on this mission to kidnap people, glue them to seats, and then be like, hey, isn't it awesome that you have no back skin and you can go live your life? Like, it's horrifying. He leaves.
You're racist.
Yeah. You leave out PTSD, you leave out, shock and death and but you'll be better. You'll be better. Now, along the way, he picks up some accomplices and apprentices. So there's several accomplices, but they're not that important to be mentioned here, like Zepp, people like that. So he gets some apprentices throughout. So he has Amanda Young. She's in the first film, Saw. She survives. She's a drug addict who also has a secret. And she's a drug addict who survives the reverse bear trap, and she becomes one of his apprentices. Then there's Mark Hoffman, who's a detective Mark Hoffman. And he found a guy who killed his sister, and he did a copycat Jigsaw killing. Jigsaw found out, he blackmailed him and turned Detective Hoffman into a Jigsaw killer, which always works great when you blackmail people that you work with. Then you have Logan Nelson from Jigsaw, his first apprentice. He's never mentioned again after Jigsaw. He's not important. All right, it's just Logan from Jigsaw. And then you have the Gold Star survivor, Lawrence Gordon, Dr. Lawrence Gordon, played by Cary Ells. He's in the first film. He comes back later in Saw 3D after Hoffman does something terrible. So he technically fails his test, but he chops off his foot. Then he becomes buds with Jigsaw, finances him, helps him out. And so he has, and this is important because it's not just Jigsaw. Jigsaw dies in the third film, and the rest of these are carried off by all of his apprentices and accomplices. And it becomes this tangled web of Saw. So in 2004, the first film was about, Jigsaw, right? There's this doctor called Dr. Lawrence Gordon, played by Cary Ells, who actually gave the diagnosis to John Kramer about his cancer. But he's also, Dr. Lawrence Gordon is like an adulteress. He's kind of a lech. He's just grumpy. And so he puts him in this dirty bathroom with another guy named Adam Faulkner, who was hired by this guy named Detective Tapp, Danny Glover. I'm not going to talk about him too much, to take photos of Dr. Lawrence Gordon because Amanda and Hoffman and Jigsaw, they all try to put the murders on Dr. Lawrence Gordon, but it doesn't stick. So it ends up with Adam, and played by Lee Wanell, the director of Upgrade and, co-writer of this movie, dumps them in a bathroom. The whole point is they're chained to things and they have to hacksaw their feet off. You have Detective Tapp in the background. They're looking for Jigsaw. That's not important. At the end of the film, though, what happens is Dr. Lawrence Gordon is like, oh man, my wife and daughter are going to die because they're kidnapped by this guy named Zepp, who we're not going to go into. So he hacks off his foot. He's like, hey man, like Adam, I'll be back. He crawls outside. Jigsaw wakes up. Jigsaw was in there the entire time. And he's like, game over. And he locks Adam Faulkner in the room. We don't know what happens to Dr. Lawrence Gordon yet. We will find out. But basically, Danny Glover dies. Adam is locked in the room. Dr. Lawrence Gordon saws off his foot. And the Jigsaw killer was just laying there the entire time. So beautiful plans. He kind of sets up the motive. $1.5 million budgeted movie. Sets us up for the next one. So Saw 2 starts focusing on New Kids on the Block's Donnie Wahlberg playing the characters called Detective Eric Matthews. And see, Detective Eric Matthews is kind of this corrupt cop. And he's pinned, he's framed a bunch of different people and put them in jail for things that they weren't at fault at. And this happens when 8 people find themselves in this house. And pretty much all of them have in common that they were put in jail by Eric Matthews. The kicker is that Eric Matthews' son is in there, and so is Amanda, who's working as a ringer, even though she's working with Jigsaw. But you don't know that yet, but I still let you know, because that's a lot of story. So they're all in this house. Detective Eric Matthews, and then you have, let's see, who else is there? Riggs, and the lady from Starship Troopers. She's another, Carrie, and then Officer Rigg. They actually find John Kramer. And John Kramer's like, listen, y'all, in 2 hours, these people on this video screen are all going to die because they've been nerve gassed. And they're all going to die. And so you have 2 hours to figure it out. But if you just wait here, and if you just chill, Detective Eric Matthews, your son will be safe. Put the emphasis on the word safe. So Eric Matthews is like, oh man, what do we got to do? We got to get my kid. We got to save my kid. And it's people are dying inside there. Amanda gets thrown into a needle pit filled with gross used needles to use to inject. It's horrifying. And so, what happens is Detective Eric Matthews gets so frustrated with it that he beats up Jigsaw, stuffs him in a car. They start driving. And what they find out is that the footage that they were watching was filmed days prior. And so while Detective Eric Matthews is taking Jigsaw to this site, a safe opens up with his son Eric, and his son lived. So all he had to do was sit there, and it all would have been fine. But it's Donnie Wahlberg, and he's a hothead. You know, he needs some Wahlburgers. He hasn't done it yet. So then Matthews and Jigsaw, they drive to this place. Matthews enters it, but Amanda's there waiting. She knocks him out. We learn she's the accomplice, even though I've told you already. She locks him in there. She locks his foot, she locks him in there, ties him to a pipe. He probably has to hacksaw his foot. And then she goes, game over. John's waiting there. That's the end of 2.
The saw's broken as well, I think.
Yeah. So no, one of the saws is broken and the other one's still good. Because they had 2 saws in there. I think it's broken. I don't know.
I remember there's a broken saw at some point. It feels like that might be the right place for it.
Lee Wanell broke one of them, sawing. And then Carrie Ells sawed off his other one. Oh, and also that hacksaw is waiting for them in that bathroom. And Xavier's throat is slit by it. So that hacksaw that sawed off Dr. Lawrence Gordon's foot is used to kill somebody in it. So basically what we've established so far is Jigsaw and Amanda are working together. Jigsaw has an inoperable brain tumor, and he's setting up games. He doesn't like corrupt cops. He's smarter than the cops. How are we going to stop him? This leads to Saw 3. We cut to Eric Matthews. He's in the bathroom. He's about to hack off his foot, and he decides to break it instead. So he's like, I'm just going to break my foot and get out of this chain. And it works. So he breaks his foot, and he gets out. But we have a new wrinkle. We learn that Detective Carey, played by Starship Troopers, she's really good in it, and his victim Troy, they're put in tests. But the problem is, Jay, their tests are rigged. So in John Kramer's test, there's always a chance to win. He never rigs it against you. You can win the game. But these 2 tests in the beginning of Saw 3 are rigged, and both these people die. So we're like, oh man, what's going on? What's happening? This isn't good. We're worried. And then we cut to Dr. Lynn Denlin. She's abducted by Amanda, and she's taken to a makeshift hospital. And, John has this inoperable brain tumor, so they force her to do surgery on him. So she saws a hunk of his skull out of his head and relieves the pressure on his brain. All the while, she has a shotgun collar around her neck that either Amanda can pull the trigger on and blow her up, or if John dies, it's connected to a timer on her neck that'll blow her head off.
This should be how all operations are done.
Yeah, exactly. And it's successful, and it works pretty well. But Amanda's she's kind of mad at this Dr. Lynn, because she's like, oh, she's flirting with Jigsaw. But the whole time, Lynn's just like, hey, y'all, let me out of here. Concurrently, though, there's this dude named Jeff. Real bonehead. He's a grief-stricken father. His son was killed by a drunk driver. He wants vengeance. So he gets put in this test. And so he's going through failing all of them. People are dying horrifically while Jigsaw is getting his brain surgery. So this guy Jeff is running around. He's trying to help people out.
He saves the judge.
He does save the judge.
His son stuff, but then he shoots the judge the next scene.
It's he saves one guy. He fails a bunch. Jeff is very slow, and it's very frustrating watching Jeff. But eventually we get to Jeff. He gets to the room where the surgery's happening, and we learn that Jeff is the husband of Dr. Lynn Denlin. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Jeff actually shoots Amanda. And while Amanda's dying, Jigsaw's like, hey, Amanda, I knew that it was you who rigged those traps, and I don't want my legacy to be with a killer. So this was actually your game, but I tricked you, and you didn't know that, and I played you. I work 8 steps ahead of everybody. Amanda, she's shot, she dies. And then so Jigsaw's laying there, hole in his skull. He's like, hey, Jeff, you can either forgive me for this, or, you can't. You can forgive me, or you don't have to forgive me, but this is your test. Jeff picks up a saw, kills Jigsaw. Jigsaw dies, and then because his heart stops, Lynn's head blows up, which is crazy. So then you get to Saw 4, which actually is taking place at the same time as Saw 3. And I mentioned a cop earlier named Rig. So there's this cop named Rig. And so Rig actually gets put into a game because he learns that Detective Matthews is in prison, so he needs to run around town to try to save Donnie Wahlberg. But we also are introduced to FBI agents Peter Strahm and Lindsay Perez. Strahm's a beast. You'll learn some cool stuff about him later. And then they also learn that Amanda's the apprentice, but they know there's also another apprentice, so they're looking for him. There's also another guy named Art Blank running around who's a lawyer. He's not an apprentice, he's more of an accomplice, so I'm not going to talk too much about him. So then like eventually Rigg and Hoffman are kidnapped, and they're like, hey, you have a couple hours, 90 minutes, or Matthews is gonna die. So then Riggs goes off on this mission. Like this guy and a bunch of people die. A lady gets killed. A lady gets scalped. Like a rapist gets killed. A lady kills her abusive husband by pulling stakes out of herself, which is interesting. But then Strom arrives to the facility where all this is taking place, and he starts following Jeff Denlin. And you're like, wait, these are taking place at the same time. So then Riggs' final test is that he just has to wait for a door. Like he has to wait for a door to just wait for a timer to run out. But instead of doing that, he runs in with 1 second left. Matthews is standing there. Matthews shoots Rigg. But then, since the door was opened up 1 second before the clock goes off, ice blocks smash Eric Matthews' head.
Yes.
And
He's
so
standing on a big block of ice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So his head is smushed. And then you have Rigg is dying. You have let's see. Rigg is dying. Matthews has his head smashed. And then what happens is, Strom actually kills Jeff because Jeff is still wandering around. And then Hoffman, we learn that he's the apprentice here, which I've already told you he is. Then he looks at a dying Rigg and like a decapitated Eric Matthews, and he's like, game over, locks him up, they die. And then we deal with Strom. So let me get to Saw 5, which this one's interesting because we open with this killer of this guy named Seth Baxter, and he's pendulumed and killed. And we see someone looking through a mirror, and we're like, who? Like a little hole in the wall, and we're like, who is that? We'll get back to that later. And then FBI, like Strom's still in the building, he's still alive. He actually gets out, and he gets his head filled like in a box, and then it fills with water, and then he gives himself a tracheotomy, like in his throat, and survives, which is kind of crazy. So he actually lives it. And then Hoffman has Corbett, Jeff's kid, which was the whole what 3 was about. He takes her, and then Strom pops out. So then Hoffman's like, holy crap, that's not good. And we get some backstory. Like Strom learns that Hoffman killed the guy in the beginning on the pendulum, and then was framed by Jigsaw. So now he's an apprentice. So we have Strom looking for Hoffman because he knows Hoffman was working with Jigsaw, who's now dead, and Amanda, who is dead. So the last one left that we know of is Hoffman, the last Jigsaw killer. So then there's also a thing too, like there's these people called the Fatal Five, and they're all involved in this house burning down and 8 people dying. It could be the house from Saw 2, who knows? There's a lot of theories about it online. There's some good Saw work in there. They're not really important to the plot.
They could have worked together to get out, but they all kill each other.
Exactly. Yeah, they're horrifyingly bad teamwork. All they had to do was work
terrible,
together.
Just awful people.
Yeah, awful people. They get sawed, they get electrocuted, they cut their hands in half.
Shrapnel bombs and things, yeah.
It's gnarly, and they're all just a bunch of idiots. Yeah. But then we learn that, Strom eventually follows Hoffman to a place. But what's interesting is that, Strom ends up dying, he gets smushed, Hoffman gets away in, this box filled with glass, and he's like, ha. So Strom is dead. That means a lot of the people who are chasing Hoffman are now dead. So you have the FBI agents are gone, you have the cops gone, you have Carey gone, you have Rigg gone, and now there's Hoffman. But it's, some people, so Hoffman's still on the loose, all the main players are dead, Strom is smushed, the Fatal Five, actually 2 people survive it, and now...
Megan Good's one of them.
Yeah, Megan Good gets killed, she gets put in a tub, Julie Benz and Malik live. So then those 2 characters live. And you see Malik later in a Saw support group. So let me get to Saw 6.
Malik's the worst one. He probably should, I hated Malik.
But you know what, though? He's not the alpha, so he lives. There's too many alphas in that room, he lives just because he keeps going.
But yeah.
So then we have Saw 6. Hoffman arrives.
We're halfway through and you're 50 minutes in.
Yeah, so Saw 6 comes up, right? And Saw 6 comes up, and this is all about predator lending, predatory lenders. A lady hacks off her arm in the beginning. And this one's actually one of the most respected Saw movies of the entire franchise. But this one revolves around this guy, William Easton, and his group, his health insurance company people. So Easton denied Jigsaw health insurance. And so this game, it puts all those people in the office in there, and Easton has to save them throughout. And it's actually pretty harrowing. It's pretty interesting. But during this, his whole ordeal, which a lot of people love, Hoffman is found out. So there's a scene where he goes to this audio lab, they find out who he is. So then he kills this guy named Erickson, he kills Perez, he kills the technician, and then he finds this, and then what's crazy, in this 6th one, you learn why Amanda was a killer and why she was doing what she did, because she was being blackmailed by Hoffman. Hoffman found out that she was indirectly responsible for Jigsaw's wife's miscarriage because when she was at her clinic, an addict ran into her and bumped her and she had to have a miscarriage. So Hoffman's been holding that over Amanda's head. So Amanda's not like a total villain, which is, we're getting deep here. Like you're like, why is all this plot happening? And so
There's too much plot in these films.
And then what happens is Jill gets this letter. So she finds out that Hoffman's one of the killers. So then she ambushes Hoffman and puts him in a modified reverse bear trap, but he gets out of it. So like he was supposed to be tested. He was never tested. So he gets out of it. At the end of Saw 6, he's out. Like he's chasing Jigsaw's wife, Jill now, who tried to kill him, test him because of what's going on. Saw 3D, not much really happens here, right? This one's about this guy named Bobby Dagan who faked being kidnapped by Jigsaw, so he's put into a whole torture thing. It ends horribly, and like his wife gets burned to death. It's really bad. But then Hoffman ends up killing Jill. He kills her with the original bear trap. But when he kills Jill, a letter goes to Dr. Lawrence Gordon, who then kidnaps Hoffman with some cronies, and they toss him in the bathroom from the first film. And then Dr. Lawrence Gordon looks at Hoffman, he's like, game over. And so then they lock him away. And he could use the hacksaw to hack off his leg. But we don't see from Hoffman again. But the most important thing is that Hoffman kills Jill, and this brings back Dr. Lawrence Gordon, who's been a sleeper the entire time. Then we get the Jigsaw, not important, right? It's like 10 years after Saw takes place. It's a prequel and a sequel. There's this guy named Matt Passmore. He's kind of a bonehead because he actually misplaced the x-rays. So he misplaced John's x-rays with somebody else, mislabeled them, so people didn't notice John's brain tumor until it was too late. So it was on him. And so he's in this thing with 5 other people. But this is before the Saw movies take place. But Jigsaw drugged him too hard, so he never had a chance to play the game, and he got sliced up. So then Jigsaw, John Kramer helps out Logan, gets him healthy again. Logan becomes his acolyte. We never see him again. This movie's not important. Whatever. Spiral, it's a copycat killer. Takes place years after. We don't quite know. There's a guy named Zeke Banks. There's corrupt cops. There's Detective William Shank, who actually is Emerson, and he just wants revenge on the cops who killed his dad because his dad was going to testify against a dirty cop. No Jigsaw.
Sam Jackson.
Yeah, Sam Jackson gets, I don't want to say, but yeah, the same fate as Deep Blue Sea. And so that happens, and it's not important to the overall Saw franchise. And we get to Saw 10, which is the only fresh rated Saw film of the franchise. And it takes place between 1 and 2, and it takes place, and it focuses on a bunch of idiots who swindled John out of his money by performing a fake brain surgery on him to cure his inoperable brain tumor. Michael Beach is in it from Deep Blue Sea 2.
Hey.
And so they don't, and then John kidnaps them. So he and Amanda and Hoffman all work together to take out these people in Saw 10. And I don't want to give too many spoilers, but it's a pretty good film. So at the end of the day, it's about this guy John, and then he dies in the third film. And then his acolytes and apprentices run amok in the next films, mostly Hoffman. And then we get to a prequel with an unimportant guy. Then we get to Spiral, that's just a reboot. And then we go to Saw 10, which is between Saw 1 and 2.
But just imagining like Nightmare on Elm Street, but Freddy Krueger died in the third one. And they're still going. They're still making.
Yeah, Hoffman becomes such a major character in it. Well, Jay, did I do a good job? Did that make sense?
You did a great job. Yeah, that made a lot of sense. And I mean, there's a lot more traps you didn't go into, but because they're not important, they're not the plot. And there's great traps in all the films. So
yeah, it's a lot. I'm tired now. So if you want to read about the traps, there's a cool article on The Ringer that ranks all of them. So Austin Gale ranked all the traps in Saw. So you can go read about that there. I just want to cover the story. There's so much story. That's what I wanted to focus on. But yeah, Jay, thank you for joining me, man.
Hey, happy to be here.
I'm tired. All right, so for me, Mark Hoffmeyer, or for Jay Cluett, this is Movies, Films, and Flicks. We'll see you next week.